Hello, Felix here. Today is October 20th, 2024. I'm going to start by saying that this video is more of a warning. Today we're dealing with a Class 7 manifestation, one that is currently active and potentially dangerous. This isn't just another ghost story, this is about something deeply rooted in history and tied to an ancient order that perhaps disturbs forces they never should have. If you're a new listener, welcome in, and if you're familiar with our work, then you know that these classifications are not taken lightly. So today it's a little bit different. We have a field report that currently landed on my desk from the requirement team. It's about a sighting at St Botolph's Priory in Colchester, Essex. Now, most of you probably aren't too familiar with this particular priory. It's tucked away in Essex, far from the well-known landmarks of London. But this report caught my attention not just because of what happened there, but because of what followed, right back here in the heart of London. Before we go into details, I just want to say it's a bit of a whirlwind here in the archive. Between the never-ending paperwork, the budget disputes, and the new interim director who's convinced she knows how things should be run, it's been difficult to focus on what truly matters. But when the report came in, I knew this needed my attention. There's something about St Botolph's that demands a closer look. Right, have a bit stretch. The requirement team's report, dated just last week, details a sighting of a hooded figure moving silently among the ruined arches of the Priory. Now, the Priory was once home to the Canons Regular of St Augustine, also known as the Augustinian Canons. It was a site steeped in ritual and secrecy. The Canons, unlike friars, did not commit themselves to corporate poverty, and their abbeys were bastions of spiritual authority. Yet, in the pursuit of understanding, it seems they may have delved into forces beyond their control. Unfortunately, the person who reported the sighting has suffered from several psychological distresses, ongoing nightmares, paranoia, and a sense of dread that lingers. They've had to take leave of absence, and it's unclear when or if they'll fully recover. A witness, a security guard on duty after dark, had described the figure as a monk, tall with a heavy robe that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. But unlike some of the other accounts of shadowy figures, the monk was physical, real, almost tangible. The guard described its face as old and tired, like a mummified visage, as though it were desperate to help or be helped, yet it seemed to bring only harm. The figure appeared, disappeared, then reappeared again, always just on the edge of his vision. And the air turned freezing cold when he stepped into the ruins, and soon began hearing whispers, faint, almost like prayers but twisted, spoken in an unrecognizable language. And then he felt an immense pressure on his chest, and the sensation that something was forcing the darkness in the ruins to close in, making it hard to breathe. Then finally he saw the hooded figure standing near what used to be an altar, head bowed, as if praying or lamenting, before vanishing into thin air. Naturally, I decided to dig into old records to see if there was any history of this kind of activity at St Botolph's, and it turns out that the Augustinian Canons who lived there were known for their strict adherence of spiritual rituals, often involving praying, that were said to protect not only the inhabitants but also the land itself. Now, the thing is, looking further on, it's very interesting because the Priory is more than just a religious centre. It was a focal point for spiritual energies, both light and dark, and it turns out that this is far from the first report of ghostly figures in the Priory. Even in the 1960s, there was multiple accounts of hooded figures, sometimes called a monk, wandering in the dusk. There's a chilling detail that those who see the figure often feel that it follows them home afterwards. They leave the Priory, but something comes back with them. Now, right here I have a particularly unnerving account from 1986, a man here called Richard Black. It dates July 23rd, and he'd been visiting his family in Colchester. On his way back to London, obviously he had been to the Priory as part of his day trip, he started to notice strange things happening. Subtle things like doors ajar that shouldn't been, cold spots in his hallway, whispers just at the edge of his hearing, but it escalated. One night he found the same hooded figure standing at the foot of his bed, face obscured but feeling he'd been watched. He even said it felt as if the figure was waiting for something. In the end, he moved out of his flat, but even then he claimed to catch glimpses of the monk in reflections, in mirrors, in windows, even in puddles on the street. There's some more recent reports that follow a similar pattern. People visit St. Botolph's and feel an inexplicable chill, a sense of dread that stays with them long after they leave. Some see the monk again, not at the Priory but elsewhere, at a bus stop, at a train window, reflecting in shop front glass, always just on the edge of their vision, never fully visible but undeniably there. One woman said she felt an intense pressure on her chest every night for weeks, as though the monk was standing over her as she slept, refusing to let go. There's something about St. Botolph's Priory that refuses to be left behind. The Priory was built on a site with centuries of history, and the destruction it faced during the English Civil War left deep scars. Royalist troops had taken refuge there, using the ruins as a defensive position, but when the parliamentary forces finally assaulted the Priory, they found all the Royalist men already dead. It wasn't the battle that had taken their lives. Something far more sinister had intervened. The Canons Regular of St. Augustine had once occupied the grounds, and their practices, though rooted in faith, may well have stirred forces beyond their control, for the site itself had originally been a Saxon church, and was considered by the Anglo-Saxons, who were pagan, as a site of spiritual significance. Now they're revered in the land Vetir, spirits of the land that were believed to protect sacred places. Now, these spirits were bound to the land, and they were respected and feared, and were given offerings to keep them appeased. The soldiers' bodies were found with crosses charred to their foreheads, their faces twisted in expressions of unspeakable terror. It was as if they'd been caught between two worlds, perhaps victims of a spirit that had once been a guardian, now twisted by centuries of conflicting energies. Some accounts whispered among the parliamentary troops claimed they saw strange symbols etched into the walls, symbols that would glow faintly even in the daylight, and for years afterwards, those who had witnessed the scene kept it closely guarded, fearing that something far darker than war had taken place in them ancient stones. It was only a few years ago when the MOD released the papers about this, deeming now it's almost insignificant. And even me myself, I didn't log it with the other accounts that were to do with St. Botolph's, just considering it an old folktale. This entire situation reminds me of another case from a few weeks back, one involving an old chapel in Southwark that had a similar entity. Witnesses there reported seeing a hooded figure, and in that instance several people found strange burns on their skin in the shape of a cross. The entity was hostile, and multiple intervention steps were made to quell the disturbances, though the results were mixed, to put it lightly. Given the similarities in the ongoing reports of this hooded figure from St. Botolph's, my assessment is that we could be dealing with a Class VII Malevolent Manifestation, an entity capable of psychological and physical harm, this being maybe the result of a spirit that was possessed when it died, forming a chimera of unholy energy. The Augustinian Canons, in their attempt to protect the Priory, may have inadvertently drawn upon the power of Land Vetir, binding something ancient to their rituals. Once a monk, now a twisted presence torn between its original purpose and the dark forces that overtook it. This entity seems desperate for release but brings only harm. It has the potential to follow and torment those who encounter it, a lingering presence that does not easily let go. The requirement team may be sending their exorcism branch down to Colchester soon. This kind of entity is beyond the usual containment efforts, and if it's still causing harm after all these years, it's clear that strong measures need to be taken. Now, when I say sending the exorcism branch, it's not as simple as giving them a call, It's not exactly Ghostbusters. There's an incredible tedious and bureaucratic process that makes you wonder if the real challenge isn't dealing with the entity, but rather the paperwork approved in time. First, of course, there's the Form E39, which officially requests the intervention of the exorcism team. It has to be filled out in triplicate, detailing the exact nature of the entity, the classification, all prior recorded incidents, any psychological or physical harm caused. Then there's Form H12, which requires a hazard assessment signed off by the 2 senior archivists, stating that the entity poses a level 4 or higher threat. Doesn't end there, of course. There's also the mandatory risk mitigation report that needs to be submitted alongside, explaining why the containment measures failed, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, once the initial paperwork is complete, the exorcism branch must convene a review panel, which can take anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, depending on how many other cases are waiting for a review. During this time, they assess whether the risk justifies the resources required, considering everything from specialized equipment to potential personnel losses. After all that, there is a liability waivers that need to be signed by every member of the team, acknowledging the dangers involved and absolving the archive of responsibility in case of, well, anything. And with good reason. The last time the exorcism branch was deployed without adequate preparation, it ended in disaster. It was a case involved in an abandoned manor up north, a Class 7 entity that had been manifesting for decades, haunting the place with increasing aggression. The review panel rushed it, and the team was sent in without all the necessary precautions. The paperwork wasn't fully vetted, and the risk mitigation plan had gaps. 2 members of the exorcism branch, both experienced operatives, lost their lives that day. One was caught in a sudden structural collapse triggered by the entity's presence, while the other succumbed to a violent psychic attack that left them incapable before they could be evacuated. Their fallout was enormous. Investigations, inquiries, more forms, and a heavy weight that the rest of us still feel to this day. The truth is, dealing with entities like the one at St. Botolph's is very dangerous, and despite the bureaucratic red tape, it does exist for a reason. It's there to make sure every precaution is taken, every dot is ticked, and every risk is mitigated. If the exorcism branch are going to Colchester, let's hope they have as much help as possible, maybe even help from the good Canons spirits that are still there, because whatever is in that ritual site, it certainly doesn't seem to want to go. Anyway, until next time, please stay safe, and remember, sometimes the past isn't just a memory. Sometimes it reaches out, and when it does, you'd best be ready. I also want to thank the new listeners who joined us here on YouTube. Your support means a lot, and if there's anything specific you think I should look into, please let me know in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe. Take care.